Hello, everyone, from the Force 2020 group meeting. And we have today a great presentation of Leo Brodie with Thinking Force. And before this presentation, we have two great friends who will show us what they do with force. One of them is our well-known Bill Ragsdale from USA. Hello, Bill. Are you ready for your presentation?
All ready. Thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Well, good morning, good evening, good day, Fourth enthusiasts around the world. It's an honor, pleasure to be here with the Fourth 2020 group. I am really impressed at the diversity and the spread and the number of people that are here today. So I shall embark onto one of my discoveries. I've seen the interest in the trend in 4 next, and thought, how can I add this in a very direct, simple way into the fourth that I use, which is the Win32 fourth. So we find that 4 and next has been borrowed from the traditional high-level languages. The words are very appropriate. N4 sets up a loop for N+1 executions. And then next completes the loop, integrates or increments, and then returns to 4 until passing 0, and then it ends. So my goal was writing this in a high-level language form for portability. And even though the conditionals in high-level languages are done in code, I was intimidated by Intel machine code. On this purpose, I actually had to go in and begin to learn Intel machine code. I still am intimidated. But what I find is Fourth uses only a very, very small number of the Intel opcodes, and you can become proficient with them quite directly. So the first test and the reason why 4 next has come into popularity is Chuck himself has gone in that direction because the loop control on do loop is quite complex. The do part setting up is easy, but the loop part is a bit complex. And I started to program this as I would for fourth I was familiar with, and I found out, no, I did not understand how Win32 fourth was actually doing the work. So my first step was to write in a classical form the word for, which will combine the word underline for, the word next, which would combine the word underline next. This is typically the way that's done in fourth systems. You have the outer compiling word, and then you have the inner execution word. So I attempted to write these in high level, where I would go into the return stack and place and extract and adjust the values on the return stack dynamically. This is normally done in code. It can be done in high level. So I wrote out the code you see here, which it turns out did not work. I found out that the loop limits in Win32 fourth are amazingly clever, and I initially had no concept of how they were operating. Again, I had to go back and read the code to figure out how it was done. So my first cut was a blind alley. I also found out that I, which gives the loop index, and I prime, which gives the limit value, and leave would not work. So I had to do a second recovery. So what I found out was that Win32 fourth pre-adjusts the loop control parameters. It takes the largest negative number, adds the loop limit to that, and so it develops a number, a very high positive number. That number is incremented sequentially until it overflows, and that is the limit condition, the ending condition, which is very clever. It simplifies computation, and you actually get the ending conditions down in 2 opcodes. So we see that the hex 8000000 is the largest negative number. The adjustment is made from that. So I felt I better use the built-in do and plus loop because they take care of all of this loop computation and index computation. So the thought would be, if I adjust the loop control before do, and if I do a -1 loop, that will do the outer control functions for my for next. So the lower level code, I said I'll make an underline for, which will be 0 swap. This will set the limit value. And then this underline next, the -1, which would be my increment. So then the high level compiling words would be to compile the underline for, and then just inline compile a do. The next would be to compile the underline next and loop. So now my initial value, my limit value, and my index value have been set. And to test them, test 2 does a 5, 4, a return, loop index, print it, next. And sure enough, we see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0 operates properly. But then I thought, wait a minute, my underline for and underline next are so short. Why not just compile them in line? And again, I would use do and loop. So my third pass through this was my forward begins with a runtime n and leaves no parameters on the stack. We compile on absolute because if you come in with a negative index to begin with, things fall apart. So we force the input limit to be a positive number. We compile the 0 in line and do a swap because we need to put the parameters in order, and then the straight query do takes care of it. The query do is slightly different, separate from do. It will accommodate an input value of 0. So if you say 0 for this is a no op, nothing happens. And next compiles n line a literal -1, and then the plus loop. So this is the complete definitions of our for and our next. Set it up properly with a couple of parameters, set it up at the end with parameters, and we're ready to go. And a test, same test as before, with 5, 4, the return for formatting, loop index and print it, next, and we see 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So success on the third try. So my result on this third test was I got 2 simple definitions and it builds on proven components. And as far as I know, it is totally portable. But when I found a little roadblock, Win32.4 provides some unbelievably powerful constructs. The first is the word C, which will decompile code in place, and the word view, which will display the source code. So when I tried my decompiler to do a C on test 3, what I realized was that in green, you'll see the query do and the plus loop were in place, but I would rather have the words for and next. And what I realized, of course, was that the decompiler is doing exactly what it should do. It's telling me what the control structures are. So I went back into the decompiler to figure out how is it done, because what I knew ahead of time and then realized was that Win32.4 has put in words to assist decompilation. So in place of, for example, the branch command, which is done for an else, that would normally show as branch, and Win32.4 it actually shows the word else. The way this is done is that in the decompiler, they have dummy words or place-taking words, so that in place of the word underline do, which would normally decompile, you actually see the word do and so on. And these are written, this is an excerpt from the decompiler, little sequence there is showing how in place of the paren do, the actual text displayed is the letters DO, and in place of the paren plus loop, you actually see the loop. So it meant that if my new construct was to be properly decompiled, I would have to go into the decompiler and make those additions. And so I realized that that was more than I wanted to do. I did not want to have to go change the decompiler. And I realized that for me, this was enough I could accommodate. I could just put up with it. So I thought, let's see what a total solution would actually look like. And so I actually went into the paren do and paren plus loop into the assembly language, rewrote them, and found out that I could rewrite them into machine code with very, very simple changes, something that I was able to comprehend. So here is the underline 4 that would be written in machine code. So I took the original do, and all I did was had to modify one line of code. And the one line of code puts the loop limit in the proper place, and all of the rest is the standard word for paren do. For in place of plus loop, my underline next word again would only have to change one line of code. We put the -1 in as the increment rather than taking it from the stack. So I found with those two words, I actually could have written this in machine code. However, and here's a verification of that. Again, we very simply follow a pattern that do and loop use, where they compile the primitives and then the words to, mark, resolve, and so on handle compiling the jump and destination addresses. And again, we see simple code, one line of code that operates just as we would expect. So in summary, I came to the conclusion that the high-level two-line solution was best. These computers these days execute at such blinding speed, the need to go to machine code was really not necessary. I ended up with an approach that is portable and clear, and I found I can live without modifying the decompiler C. And finally, in conclusion, I learned not to fear machine code programming. And I will give a slight commercial for the management. This is forming a part of the textbook that I'm writing on Win32.4. It's probably a year away. Every month I work on it. It's taking a couple of months longer. And so in maybe a year from now, you're going to see a complete textbook on Win32.4. And so with that, I turn things back to our fearless leader. Peter, take it away, and thank you.
Amazing, Bill. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
No, it's clear.
Good. I appreciate stunned silence. It shows everyone is absorbing those profound statements. Thank you.
Bill, I have a question of the leave definition. Did you code it or not?
It works. That works properly. No need to code it. The I prime, and the leave all operate because they are within the wrapper of do and loop.
Okay, understood also.
Bill, question here. No, I've done a bit with 4next and using separate loop stacks and so on, so I don't have to compile a branch and calculate that. But one of the things I decided that I'd like I to go like a do loop, go up, and I keep the count separate. Have you ever thought about doing that? Because you go through it and 0, 1, 2, 3 rather than 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
No, I had not thought of that. I would offer that using my approach where you change the loop parameters at high level would be done quite directly. If you're doing a 4next that counts up to a limit, start with that, those two high-level definitions I did. I'm sure it's very direct.
Yeah.
One of the problems I have with 4Next, I do not see the value in going to that. Dr. Ting, I believe, in his work with C compiled fourths, went to that mechanism because handling the conditional do loops is so complex. I can appreciate that, but what I hate to give up in the 4Next construct is making a do loop on addresses. I like to set up an address of an array, index across it either by cells or by bytes. And with 4Next, it becomes a beast trying to set up a loop on addresses. You have to continually, off the index, recompute the address on every loop. And so I would not give that up.
Yeah. Because I'm just wondering whether you're referring to the address, the branch address, or you're talking about the indexing address part of it there. Because what I tend to do is, sorry, because what I tend to do is I basically, when for or do comes along, it's not the compile version of do, it's just the one do, and it gets compiled, and all it does is push the current IP instruction pointer onto a separate loop stack, which also has, the limit and the index. And so that therefore when loop or next come along, they don't bother reading a branch. They just grab that register and jump straight to it immediately. Yeah.
Well, one of the little secret things I discovered was that do, in addition to pushing the loop, index, and the limit, it also publishes, puts on the return stack the leave address. So that's the magic. When you hit leave, the word goes 3 levels up on the return stack to find out a destination for the exiting branch.
I
So
see, Greg.
That's good.
Sorry.
One more level of complexity on do loops.
Sorry, Greg, do you have any questions?
I do, just kind of a detail. I noticed you had, hi, Bill. I noticed you had an abs in there in case the argument loop index was negative, and I know you're concerned about efficiency, with a little overflow trick and all that. I was just wondering, it makes me think of, it's not uncommon in compilers to have both a debug and a release mode, where during initial testing and development, you might do some of those range checkings on arrays and so forth. But in a release mode, you'd like to get rid of those because you maybe convinced yourself that your program works. And so you could make some of those things conditional. In fact, even in a debug mode, you could even consider thinking of maybe outputting a message if something doesn't look quite right. Just curious on your thoughts on that.
Good. All very good points. You've got the trade-off on complexity, detail, performance. I have set aside all performance issues when using Win32 because I find no application I've run takes more than about 5 seconds. I did some very elaborate, I forget if they were prime number searches or whatever. And okay, it took a minute or two. But in other environments, I've had a case where elaborate computations would take many, many, many minutes. And so again, selective compilation is actually very interesting. Using the square brackets, if, else, and then, you can, and Win32 makes a fair amount of use of that. It's amazingly set up to do 2 different floating point representations, I believe 8-byte and 10-byte. And when the system compiles on startup or recompiles on startup, it actually makes a selection. Are you going to use 10-byte or 8-byte floats? And as far as I can see, no one in the real world has ever made a setup on 10 bytes. but for some reason it was put in at day one and it stayed there. But it's done by selective compilation. And so small features could be added that way. The only time I would do something like remove that absolute check would be if I was putting this into a PROM in an embedded system, because then I would feel that the testing had to have been sufficiently comprehensive that I wouldn't need that. And again, if you're doing an embedded system, well, possibly saving the code space or the time execution actually matters. But in an interactive system, I think leave all the protection in you possibly can.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Fantastic, fantastic. This was a great talk of Bill, one of my favorites. Even I love everyone here in the group, but his knowledge is super. I will present the next talk from our friend Willem Ouwerkerk from Netherlands. What do you want to show the group, Willem?
I want to show something about Nofort. And Nofort is a bit misleading name. Especially our German friends were a little bit shocked by the name. The only reason why it's called Nofort is a bit of a joke. I built Fort system with Albert Nijhoff. And I'm Willem Ouwerkerk, and it's our initials, Nijhoff, Ouwerkerk, Fort. So it really is Fort. I'll start sharing.
Please.
So our latest edition is a Nofort for the RP 2040. A few months ago, we got a few of these boards, and I really like the specs of the chip. So that's why I asked our national group if there are people interested in it, and we started a small working group. And we have a first result. It's called Nofort T for thumb. And it's all, like all other Noforts, an indirect threaded system, because we really like the simplicity of indirect threaded systems. And you see here, the first working version with assembler and disassembler added, and some PO additions. Now, what is a Nofort? We started with Nofort for the Nofort M, for the MSP 430. Then we built a Fort for the RISC-V. It's called Nofort R, and now we have Nofort T. I built a system with Jeroen Hoekstra. Some people already know him. Willem Jager and Albert Nijhoff, with whom I made all other systems. And of course, I did some work myself, and I had a lot of I got a lot of information from Micrisp, especially the boot. But the boot for this system is quite complex. So we have a small tool set, an assembler, disassembler. We can build two files ourselves, secondary boot, and of course the RP 2040 boot with all the steps needed, like resetting the whole system and setting up all clock systems on it, and that there are quite a few. And of course, CRC generation, that was quite a hurdle because it's just a little bit different than most CRC generations. But we have in our group Jeroen Hoekstra, and he's a specialist in CRC. So it gives a little advantage. And finally, I wrote a disassembler. So that's the system for now. It's generated with a meta compiler, and it's rewritten from the Nofort R, and because they're both 32-bit systems, they're quite similar, but of course the machine code is all completely different. So I rewrote the meta compiler and target file. All no-forts are configurable because we like to adjust our personal systems. That's one of the things I like about Fort, is that you can put a system, build a system that you like. And that's one of the main reasons why I always integrate configuration options. For example, the baud rate, clock frequency, the size of the dictionary, and saving new images. When you extend Fort, you want to save that version so you don't have to reload it each time. And this no-fort runs completely in RAM. The other no-forts were all flash systems. And the RISC-V and the MSP are both RAM, flash systems, and the MSP 430 has also FRAM. That's a little bit different. Now I added finally some example code, the ADC, bit IO, and lots of PO examples with the PO assembler. Now what's no-40? It's ITC, completely standard. Especially I like to mention the vocabularies because the standard uses Bill's only system, and I'm very fond of Bill's system. Thank you, Bill, for that. And one nice thing is all that I can use already present no-fort documentation, so you can find that on the no-fort website. There are only a few things different, and we will likely add that in the coming weeks. One of the important features of no-fort is that it's robust. It is not likely to crash. You can do things in no-fort that make most Fort systems crash immediately. Then we have marker and shield for forgetting parts. Marker is a standard word, shield it is not. The difference between the two is that marker forgets itself and the code behind it, and shield doesn't forget itself, but only the code behind it. So you use it on a different place. Marker you tend to use at the beginning of a file, and shield you tend to use at the end of the file. So it protects libraries. Then we have freeze. Freeze saves the current image in the flash chip on the board, and we have added a second freeze for an alternative image. I already use that a lot, and then when I create PO programs, I create them on the system where I have the complete environment, including the PO assembler and disassembler. They're quite large, and I have a mini PO program that's only the basic PO control, and the PO assembler can write column definitions to the screen, so it's in text form, and this column definitions tend to have all information about the PO program in it, in simple data and addresses with a store behind it. So you can export your PO program and use it on a limited system. That was one of the things I like to have. Then all no-forts have an add factor, and add factor is a simple value where you can put in an address, and that it will start up with that when it's booting. Then we have the no-fort prompt. It's a very simple but smart prompt. It shows a number base, the data stack, and return stack use. I will show you that in a moment. And there are a lot of other no-fort specialties that I like to tell one time about, but that's And that goes too much time. It goes beyond the scope of today. Here's a little bit, sorry, a little bit of code. The ARM code uses what they call they have no mean of reading in large literals, and they have a mechanism they call literal pools. And that's mostly a quite complex system with lots of labels. We also wrote an assembler doing that, but it was a monster. It was about 20 kilobytes, and it still wasn't completely finished. And we have, because we use indirect threaded code, we have a lot of pointers in it. And one of the pointers, most of you know, is the W register. And the W register contains the code field of the word that is executed. And we use that in this definition. You see a literal here, that's a call address. And this part of the code uses the W register to read that literal in the hop register. And in this case, we use that as a subroutine call. We jump to it with hop bx. And in this way, we reuse the secondary boot code to start up different images. You see, it's very simple. It's only 2 opcodes and a literal, and just comma, and the word code reroutes the code field, so it points to the real code, and that's all. And also the implementation of that word is very simple. It's something like here swap store, no more, and a little check, of course, if it's used on the right place. Here a little bit about the configuration. That's all comment about what you can do with the configuration, and we leave that further on. And this is these are the configuration options, the basic. You can set the frequency in megahertz. You can set which MUART you will use. For now, it's only MUART 0 because I want to add the added complexity only when it's completely stable. Then you can set the baud rate just in as the number what it is, and we also use a switch in NoFort. With that, you can skip the add factor, and that we did build in that so you can skip your program when you make fault or something like that, or you just want to add something in the port system again. Then you can skip the add factor but of course, when you write a turnkey system and you don't want it anymore, you put an invalid value in there, and it's no problem anymore. Then it's sealed off. And when you want to test this, you just type cfg config, and then it uses the values from the table to set a new configuration. And if you did it all right, it's working. And if it's working, you can freeze it with freeze or freeze2. And that's complete configuration. Now we go to the NoFort. I show you its workings, if it will. I think I have to restart the terminal. Yes, and a little bit larger. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay. This is starting the main version. And it's no for T with a V behind it, and that V gives a sign that it has vocabularies. You see the fourth vocabulary. The fourth vocabulary in the basic form of NoFort contains only standard words. When you want a non-standard word, you type extra, that's the extra vocabulary, and you get the non-standard additions. Most of these words are well known, but not all. And then we can go, for example, to the assembler. And then you have the RP2040 assembler available. Now we can go to the second Ford system. You see here not a V, but an E, NoFort TE. That E is for experimental. And that's a version without vocabularies. And you can see it when I type words. You get a much longer list. Because because we don't have vocabularies anymore, it's all in the same list. Back to the standard system. We already did words, and I want to show you a little bit about the prompt. We type in some numbers. You can see behind the OK there's there's three numbers on the stack, and you see a strange a token, a fetch, and a left, a closing bracket. And when we change the number system, it changes. You see, when we type it to so the first character gives a sign about the base that we use. And it's not a complete number, but if you get used to it, it's very handy. You can see in which number system the system is working. But there are more things. I can put something on the return stack. Most systems are dead now. But the prompt shows a little plus, and it gives something added to the return stack that shouldn't be there. So we get it off. Print it, and then we get something from the return stack. We get a minus. So you get the prompt gives you signs about the state of your system, and to correct it, we just put it back, and it works again. Then we have the build just told us about modifying C. In NoFort, we don't have to modify C because it uses only general Fort knowledge, not specific. And you can see it here, that's D dot. And D dot says it is in the Fort vocabulary. Its name is D dot, and it's a column definition. And further, it shows the contents of that column definition. If we use, do it on another word, du dot, that's not standard. You can see it's in the extra vocabulary, also a column definition, and it uses some other internal words. Then I show a little bit more than we do. Sorry, I would like to show C. You can see C, the general, that uses the general knowledge, it recognizes a header in the system. And so you can compile on and on as long as you like. It recognizes literals, the RAM addresses. And even if you add new, create those words, it doesn't have any problem with it because it only uses the data from the CFA to search for the header that belongs to the word. And then it uses that to show the information that it contains. Then we have also the disassembler. You see here the RP2040 assembly. And this is one of the nice constructs in it. The LDM is load multiple, and it uses also auto increment. So when we use it, it uses SP as a pointer, loads the data in Sun, and increases SP. Dus with a single word, we do a pop on the stack. It's fast and very nice. And I also use it for the loading the literals. When I have more than one literal, you can also use LDM and just load them in 116-bit opcode. You can load in NoFort about a maximum of 6 literals in one go. And each literal takes 1 cycle extra. Each register that is filled takes 1 cycle extra. Here you see a call to subroutine. UM/mod uses an external subroutine to do the main work. At the end, this is the next routine for NoFort. It reads the IP to W, reads W to hop, and moves hop to the program counter, and then we are there to run the code. And then a few last things to finish. I just show how the compiler does its work. When I drop a file, you can see it goes quite rapidly. That's the PO assembler. This is the PO disassembler. And now a small PO demo using the WS2812 LED that's mounted on this board. And it's running now, and here we got some data about how the PO registers are used. And when I stop sharing, yes, any question? Even kijken. Can you see this? If it's all working.
Yes, I can see it.
A great
Yes.
presentation, Willem. Fantastic.
Thank you. It was quite fast, but I got some loose connections. But you can see here the LED burning. That's a smart LED. And yeah, that's it. And if there's still any questions about NoFort or the system, I would try to answer them.
Amazing work. Fantastic.
Thank you. It's of course based on the amazing work of a lot of people.
Willem, one question I have with this Raspberry Pi Pico boards.
Yes.
What about installation? Do you need to install an FTD device for the serial port?
No. When you use a cable like this, can you see it? I don't know. Maybe I should try to stop sharing.
I think Peter is trying to ask if you need to use an external USB to serial adapter.
And I didn't completely get that question. Can you do it again? It was a bit distorted.
Show it again, Willem, the board now.
So can you see it? This is
Yes.
the board. It's,
Yes.
it's just
Okay, this
a
is an
USB
FTD.
connector,
Yes,
and
this,
the only thing you
Yeah.
have to do is put a UFT file on board of this thing, and it talks. Nothing more.
yes, it's a converter. Yes,
Yes.
for TTR. For
A
TTR.
standard converter. It works
But
also.
do you plan in the future to support a USB download of the code? Is that possible?
It should be possible, but I think there's a lot of work in finding the documentation. I did try to overclock the system because a lot of people do it, but I can't find real internal information of how to do that. It's all people that are showing how to do it use internal Python functions, and I don't know the internals of those systems. If somebody does, I would like to try it. Dus for now, the maximum frequency of the system is 132 megahertz. That's valid. These are valid numbers for the PLL clock system.
Amazing, amazing. We will try it. I love it, your work.
Okay.
Well, your board was different than what's available to me in the United
Yes, I got those boards too. That's this one, you mean?
the Raspberry Pi. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I was wondering about your board.
This is a Chinese board.
Okay.
One of the nice things about it had a much larger flash memory and some extra switches and LEDs on it. And it's cheaper. So it's a lot of nice things.
Okay. I can buy the Raspberry Pi board for like $4 in the US, but
yeah, this is $3. And the flash memory is 8 times as big as on the standard Raspberry Pi. And one of the other things I like is that it really has a reset switch on the board and a user switch. So you can play with the board only. You don't have to solder any wires on it.
very nice. Thanks.
Yes. Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
How much space that is stored in Flash do you allow the user to use? I ask because on my own fork that runs on RP2040 Zepto fork, I allow everything up to 1 megabyte of Flash space to be used, but that's because I execute out of Flash using the XIP cache. But because you are copying into RAV,
Yes.
how much of the space do you allow the user to use from Flash?
I used from Flash two slots, one and both of the size of the RAM. So I have about 80K of Flash I use.
80K?
Yeah, a little bit more because I want to that the priest can save the whole RAM. If you want to write an application that fits in the complete RAM, it should be possible.
Fantastic, guys. Amazing.
I can't think of such a light application, but maybe somebody does. If there's a lot of data.
I'm in a Zoom call.
Excellent, excellent, Travis. But now I want to present our next speaker. A big applause for Leo Brodie.
Hello, I want to make sure my audio is connected, right? You can hear me?
Hello, Leo.
I can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay.
Hi, Leo, I can hear you.
Good. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's kind of amazing to me to see all you guys doing such great work still in fourth. I mean, I'm not surprised that people are still working in fourth. I think it's going to be around for a long time, but it's just kind of amazing to see all the activity. because I have not been involved, as you know, in the fourth world for several decades. And we're talking, you know, but it's great to be here and it's really exciting. And Peter asked me to come back. I had done one of these. It turned out this was 2 years ago, Peter, that we did that, almost to the day where where you had me on the first time. And I talked about, I remember talking a lot about how I came to write Starting Forth. I was working at Fourth Inc. at the time. And I don't remember talking as much about Thinking Forth. I mean, subjects came up from Thinking Forth, but I didn't really talk about writing of it. So that's what I proposed that I would talk about today. Peter thought that would be good. So again, I don't have a PowerPoint, but I mean, I actually have a PowerPoint, but it's just because there's a couple of things I want to show you, but I don't have a presentation. So I'm going to start with that right now. Does anybody have any questions before I start, just to kick things off? No, that's fine. I will just go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so as you know, I wrote Starting Forth while I was an employee of Fourth Incorporated, and I was there at the company for 2 years. And while I was there, they asked me to write a beginner's manual, which I did. And when I left Fourth Inc., I became a consultant, and there was at the time there was a lot of demand for people. People were interested in Fourth, and it was partly as a result of the first book. So I was able to go to companies and speak about things, which was a lot of fun, and there was a lot of interest in things like that. So I thought it would be good to follow up with a book of my own. I say of my own because Starting Forth was written as an employee of Fourth Inc., and so they owned the book, which was a great opportunity for me. But after I left the company, I could write my own book, and I would be the copyright would be in my name, which would be nice. And so I actually spent about 2.5 years from the time that I left Fourth Inc. until I published Thinking Forth. And originally, when I signed the contract in September of '82, the contract called the book Solving Problems with Forth, which is not nearly as good a name. But that's the way I was thinking about the book. And part of it in the contract was I actually got, it was so important to me that I get Chuck's voice in there somehow, and Chuck's wisdom, because the whole idea of how do you solve problems in Fourth it really comes from Chuck. So I actually arranged for an honorarium to be paid to Chuck, so that I could interview him a couple times, which I did. And then you see in the book, you see a lot of the quotations from those interviews with Chuck. And that was the first one was in January of '83. And the other thing I remember is while I was developing all of this, I was teaching classes on these ideas, because there was interest at the time. And one time I actually had the class in my house in Chatsworth, California. So there we had maybe 10 guys fly in, and stay at a hotel and then come to my house for several days of me going through what eventually became the content of Thinking Forth. And it was finally published, I think, in late '84. I don't have the date. So that was the first edition. And I can talk more about that, but I just want to show the chronology, what happened here. Trying to advance. There we go. So the second edition was actually the same as the first, but the publisher wasn't as happy with the success of Thinking Forth as with Starting Forth. It didn't sell as many books. In other words, it's kind of a more, advanced subject. So after a while, they stopped publishing it and they just lost interest in it. They weren't promoting it at all. So I was able to get the copyright back from them. And then the Fourth Interest Group in the Bay Area, Figforth, decided that they wanted to publish it under their own banner, which was great. So they kept it in print. And that was Marlon Overson did all the production work on that. So they actually had to scan it in and recreate the book so that it could be reprinted. But it was not different in any way other than minor typos. And then the best thing that happened was, and this was every 10 years, right? We had a new interest in the book, and Figforth was no longer able to operate. And so the book was then out of print. And I was contacted by John Ouwerkerk. I don't really know how to say his name, and we've never met, but he contacted me and asked if I'd be interested, because the book was dead, essentially. He asked if I'd be interested in releasing it under a Creative Commons license, which meant that they could make a version of it that could be distributed, as you know, on SourceForge and for free. But I would retain the copyright, and the agreement was nobody else could profit from the free version of it. In other words, nobody else could reprint the book, but I could. So it allowed me then to publish it a third time under my own control, and that put it back in print. It allowed people to have it for free, and I just thought that was a really great idea, and it helped me. It helped the community, and it's really cool. So I want to take this time to acknowledge all those people that worked on that. I know Bernd Payson is here. Can you come on and say hi, Bernd? Because
Yeah, hi.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about what you all did?
I did the support for the LaTeX infrastructure and this the subversion repository on SourceForge, and so I did make sure that all the scanned images were converted to vector graphics and had a high quality in the printing. And as John Ouwerkerk put it, I took the ball and ran. So what I really did is the back stuff to get everything to work, and the other people on the list often did one chapter typeset conversion from the scan to LaTeX, and I made sure that the output would look nice and polished and have a very good printing quality as it should be.
Well, you guys did a great job. I know, I saw that they actually, there's a section of the book where they talk about who did what, but I was never involved in any of that. They did such a beautiful job because this book came out really well. Really beautiful. Is that in your house, Burn? Someone
Yeah, that's my little son makes some noise. He's playing over here. If he's using his our sofa is now covered with all the heavy duty machines like a caterpillar, and over there's a truck.
Earth moving. Excellent. Well, congratulations on that.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to thank, I don't know if any of these other people are here now. I don't think so, but thank you to all.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
John Ouwerkerk did the first things to get this project started. He talked to you to release this under free license, and that was very important as first step. And then he made a call for volunteers, and that assembled all the other people.
Yeah. I asked John if he could come today, and he said he's actually taking a class right now in cabinet making, which I love the idea of woodworking, and so so that's why he couldn't be here, but he'll watch the recording. But anyway, thanks again to all these people. And
I haven't checked how many downloads are now, but at that time when we released the book for years, there were about 1,000 downloads per month. So did reach a really lot of people that way. And you
Yeah, that's
cannot do that by just print.
Yeah, that's
Some
really-
people probably ordered the printed version, but a lot of people just got it online and read the PDF.
or the Kindle version, I guess. Yeah.
Or, yeah,
To be honest, I think a lot of colleges have the book ordered.
mhm.
So it's nice because I'd see a trickle, a little income stream, very small amount of money, but it's continuous, which is kind of amazing because that was 20 years ago. So
Yeah.
just a little bit about what inspired me. I just pulled some things up last night. I was kind of realizing I wanted to have something to show and not just to talk about. But one of the inspirations for me when I started doing this was the fact that I found that there was academic research, and the main person that really kind of blew me away was this guy here, David Parnas. Now, I was doing all this research before we had the internet. It's kind of hard to believe now, but we actually had to go to the library and things like that. I was really amazed to see the way he described information hiding. And although that was the terms he used were never terms that Chuck used, what he meant by that was putting in, he didn't mean protecting or, making it secret. He was referring to factoring code in a way that things are grouped together that could change. You put the way you structure things, the way you design the structure of the code, like the modules and the procedures and all that stuff, is you look at what could change and also what could be reused. So those are the two, that's not the way people were thinking about modularization previously, from what I can tell. I mean, all the papers were talking about things like flow and things like that, or data passing, but those two criteria. And I thought that was very accurate for the way Chuck would tend to factor his designs, because he knew that things would always be changing. And it was really, that was kind of incentive for me to, well, it was a part of the incentive for me to want to write the book. And then we also had people like, oh wait, what happened? I had one with, I had another slide here, I thought. Oh yeah, this one, skipped over it. Kim Harris was teaching courses in Forth. He was up in the Bay Area, where Fig Forth was. He was really active in Fig Forth, along with Bill, who's on this call. And but Kim wrote this article in Dr. Dobbs called The Fourth Philosophy. And again, it was just an example of how we could talk about Forth in a way where we weren't talking about, the mechanics of drop and swap and all that kind of stuff. We were talking about it from a higher perspective, like how do we think about problems and how do we abstract problems and things like that. So I like that, and I got to hang out with Kim a lot, and when I would go up north, and so that kind of developed the idea. And by the time I decided to do the book, it was pretty clear that I wanted to do a book about using Forth, kind of from the higher perspective of how do you use it. So that was the main thing I wanted to show there. So yeah, so I got to interview Chuck. I sat down with him a couple times and took a lot of dictation, and I mean, I typed it all up, and then I had great quotes to pull from that I could use to design the book and pull in pieces wherever I thought it made sense. And then also, as you know, I got a list of other people using Forth in real life, and called them on the phone and use a cassette recorder. I recorded the conversation. So I had the same thing, and I would transcribe that and then use quotations from those people and flavor them, spread them throughout the book to kind of make it more credible. And what's interesting is they didn't all agree on everything, which is great, you know, because everybody has their own way of doing fourth, and that's really as it should be. So, but I thought it was really valuable. I thought some of the things they said was just brilliant. And I mean, at the time, I was not, although I was being hired as a consultant to talk about fourth and how people were using it, I had not really professionally written any fourth applications. I was not a fourth programmer at the time. I did later more of that, but when I wrote Thinking Fourth, the only real application I was doing was the text former that I wrote the book in, which was based on the text former that Chuck Moore developed. And what I remember of it, it was all, you would type the text in fourth blocks. So it'd be a sequence of blocks, and paragraphs started, I think, with a open square bracket, a left square bracket. And then you'd have your text. So everything after the square bracket would be square bracket space, obviously, because square bracket was a word. So following that would be the text string. And then a closing bracket would be the closing thing. And then you could have words, I think the PP was paragraph, and that would make a double line. So it was things like that you could do. And I made it more advanced with, I don't really remember anymore, but I called it QTF, Quick Text Formatter. And it was based on Chuck's idea, which was a real simple text editor. And that's how I wrote the book. And I had
Leo, that is really amazing what you are telling. I don't know if people are following what you say. There are no book writers that write their own book in the language, and they write their own word processor.
Well, they don't need to anymore, but you know, that's for sure. But I had, when I left Fourth Inc., it was January of '82 when I was starting out on my own, and it was obvious that I needed a computer. The only thing I had computer-like was this little assembly test board thing by Texas Instruments, but I needed a computer. So I went out and bought an IBM PC, which had just come out. I don't know exactly when it came out, but it literally just came out. And so I got the very first version of it with, I think, 48K memory and no hard drive. It had floppy drives, so those old school floppy drives. And interestingly enough, when you use Microsoft Word, the icon and all these other programs, the save icon, I think it's so funny. The icon to save is usually still that little, well, probably not anymore. That's probably kind of a little bit, I'm dating myself, but for a long time, the save icon was an old school floppy disk, which is fun. Anyway, so I had my IBM PC, and I'm still a Windows person, but I wrote the book that way, and it took like you can see, it took us a couple of years to write the book and put it all together, and then do the illustrations for it. I just wanted to share, because I really don't know. We'll open this for questions, see what you all want to ask. But I just want to share a couple of the cartoons that I thought were funny. I just think that's a real good cartoon, because I certainly do this all the time. I get so obsessed with what I'm focused on, you know, tunnel vision, that I don't see the big picture. And that was my car, what my car looked like at the time. It's a Volvo. I drew that. I went out in the yard and drew a picture of the car. Anyway, I just like that picture. And this one makes me laugh now. It's just silly. Lawn mow, fence paint, post fix. It's definitely a pun. You can see I like puns. Anyway, that's all I have for that. But I was really indebted to all the people, the experts that I got to talk to, and have them share their wisdom with me, as well as Chuck and all the other people at Fourth Inc. too, that were really supportive of it. So I'd be happy to take any questions about anything that I could answer.
Yeah, I do have a question. I just downloaded your the fourth book from SourceForge, and it's nice. I thank you very much. But isn't there, because I saw the Amazon link also, but is there a way for me to provide something for you to, you know, like some sort of a donation to get for you to get something out of it?
No, there isn't. But you could buy the book. Maybe that's more than you want to pay. Is that what you're saying? Like you don't really want the book?
Well, no, I'll probably take the book also. It's just that I mean, I don't know how much Amazon takes off from the book versus what you get out of it. So I might as well give you, you know, that amount instead of Amazon, if you know what I mean.
Well, actually, there is. That's a great question. I don't want to take a lot of time answering, but I have a I have a I can't remember which one, but I have two websites that are not related to Fourth at all. One is for my recording studio, which is fairly active, and the other one is for my music. And I think on the recording studio one, which is called Balladeer Studio, there's a page where you can send payments with Venmo. So I'd be happy to take little tips, $1 or whatever you want to send. That'd be very nice.
Leo, and what about this was a great question from Frederick. What about making a Tinder campaign for a CERT book, Thinking Future in Force, or Forcing Future, the Forcing Future or something, the CERT version of your book, probably with people from the community together?
I'm not understanding. I got a little distracted by the
making a campaign on Tinder or something like that, that we all can add for a CERT version, a new book.
Oh,
Like a crowdfunding.
A third book?
With founding, yes.
Oh, yeah.
On Tindy.
I think you want to call that Thinking Forth 2020, don't you, Peter? Is that what you're saying?
Without numbers, because this can be forever, no? It can.
I think Ralph is wanting to say something.
Did you have an editor? The editor is not the software, but in a publishing house, somebody who reads the book. And as you said, you wrote the book where you were in a software company. They don't have an editor, yeah. Though the lady wrote her own book, but
yeah,
another.
Yes, I've forgotten, but this was published. The 1984 edition was published by a subset of Prentice Hall, which is a huge publishing company, and so they had an editor, and so it was a normal thing. It happens for all the authors. They write it, and then the editor.
And what was the
suggestions? You go back and forth. I had to take the suggestions, or I could argue against it, or whatever. But usually they're just helps the author make things more clear.
And what was the major improvement of the editor as feedback which you implemented? So what did change?
Oh, well, you see, at that point, that's the interesting thing about these books. I was kind of surprised how the publishing industry works. And this, I'm speaking now of back then, and I think it's probably still the same. In fact, it might even be more so now. But they really don't think, I think they think about it as a long-term money game. So if you have a publisher who works in the technical fields or the scientific fields, they're interested in publishing a lot of books over time, so that over time, all the money that they put into producing the book will pay back, and in topics that don't sell. But they aren't interested in taking the time to figure out which ones are going to sell and which ones aren't. They aren't interested in being advocates for anything, or so the editor isn't interested in any factual. It's not like you would think like, oh, this person knows a little bit about fourth. They don't know anything about fourth, right? And that's really not their job. They're just looking at it from the point of view of what makes sense grammatically according to the editorial books of style and things like that. So, and that's all they're interested in. And same with the production people. When they make the cover, they're not thinking about what would be meaningful to fourth users. They're just thinking about what would attract eyeballs on the shelf or, you know, whatever. So it sounds a little cynical, but it's not, the editorial feedback they're giving back is not anything to be interested in.
As a book was written in ancient times, there was no word processing, but just your editor. In word processing nowadays, most typing mistakes are deleted or are indicated. So how was the process to write a book? It's the same was in writing a book in tech at that time, without any modern help to get all the typing mistakes away. Which is so.
It was all done. It was all done in the mail, you know, with hard copy. So I would send them an envelope with all the printed papers, the sheets, and then the editor would manually mark them and then send them back. It was just all done manually. That's the old way, the old school way. I mean, it's just amazing thinking back because it was 40 years ago, but so much has changed. I guess one other thing I'll comment on is I was kind of flipping through it. I read the first maybe third of it last night. And it's been a while since I've read it. And I really liked the kind of all the beginning stuff, the preliminary stuff, talking about the conceptual stuff. And when it gets to a certain point where I start talking about my word processor and it gets so boring, I can't even read it. I think I was trying to use an example of a real application, and it's so arcane, you know, you can't really get your head into it. And then I think later on, so I'm not really happy with that part of the book. And then later on, it gets more into the implementation part. And that's where I think I started using a lot of Chuck's comments and stuff like that, and other people's as well. So I think it starts to pick up, but that little one section in the middle just is like really
okay,
well.
because at that time, WordStar was already on the market for CP/M. And I remember after 40 years, there was a German actor who wrote his biography with this first portable CP/M computer. But this was very expensive. As you said, you just have a board. You didn't have $10,000 or $20,000 to buy a computer at the time, probably. The Osborne, yes. The Osborne computer was the first portable CP/M computer with a display you can port with two hands, whatever, and write something with it. So the level of writing with WordStar was different than yours, I think.
Okay, Leo, we have two questions, one from John O'Donnell and the other one from Benjamin. So we start with John.
Hey, good morning, Leo, and appreciate you taking the time to present to the group. I did have a question. Would it ever be possible to work out the various copyrights and do the same thing for starting fourth that you've done with thinking fourth? So create a new version that could be printed out and resold through Amazon, or would the copyright holders not release that?
I always wished that Fourth Inc. would do exactly the same thing, because what they, I mean, I don't know. I guess I could have pursued it more heavily, but
right.
The attempts that I did, they were content to release it because at the end of the day, they released it for free as well.
Yeah.
But they didn't put a Creative Commons license on it. So they didn't make it possible for them to make any to make any profit from the book by publishing it, or they didn't have any incentive to publish it. And also it got a little confused because I was the author of the first version, and then I did a revision, the second edition, which I put a lot of time into, and because at that time I wasn't working with Fourth Incorporated anymore as an employee. We negotiated so that I would get, I think, a third of the royalties of the book going forward. But then they had it other revisions, and they had other people involved. And I think there were at least a couple other people who were doing more revisions with them. And somehow my involvement in that got lost track of, and diluted to the point where it wasn't considered anymore. So I didn't have any interest in it, and they didn't have any interest. I don't think they didn't know how to, I don't know. They just didn't do it. I think it would have been good if they had.
Yeah.
Because it would be nice to have the book in print.
And one more question. Did you ever encounter the guys who did JForth for the Amiga platform from Delta Research?
No, I'm afraid I'm not familiar with it, with that. I don't remember.
Okay. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Sure. Yeah.
Benjamin.
Yeah, it's great to actually hear you talking about this stuff. Yeah, I got into Forth about 1982, 83 when some guy brought it into the Apple II lab. I was a teenager, and of course I read Starting Forth, and then Thinking Forth was like, that was really, you know, I didn't have any formal background in programming, right? I was just a self-taught little hacker, and Thinking Forth really, you know, there weren't really books that talked about the concept of programming if you hadn't gone to college, I guess, you know, that were accessible to me. And I remember the whole concept of thinking about domain specific languages and creating, instead of writing a program to do what you want to do, writing a little language to describe what you want to do and then doing that. Now you're saying here that you weren't really much of a Forth programmer, but you introduced that concept to me, and I know you couldn't have just gotten it from a couple of conversations with Chuck and got that profound level. So where did that come from for you?
It came from, it came from Fourth Inc. And then, like I said, I was really excited to read these academic papers like David Parner. There were a bunch of different articles that I was finding, and when I was in that phase of researching for Thinking Forth. So it wasn't a new idea. The idea of, I think that's something Forth themselves, the Fourth Inc. advertises, is that's how you think about solving problems in Forth. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess so. But you say you weren't much of a Forth programmer yourself. So how did you get those concepts deep enough for you to be able to describe it to a teenage kid who had no computer science background at all, frankly?
Well, again, I talked about this in Forth. I consider myself extremely lucky to have been hired at Fourth Inc. because I did not come in. Well, at the time I had taught myself assembly language, and I didn't know, I didn't have any experience at all. And so, like professional experience as a programmer. And so I wasn't able to get hired as a programmer, which was what I was originally thinking of doing. But I had been a copywriter for an advertising agency before. And so I kind of parlayed that into an ability to write. And so I became a copywriter, a technical writer. And so that's what I was hired as by Fourth Inc. But I did have programming experience. So I understood what was involved, and I had been doing little programming projects on my own, but they wanted me to do technical writing. And another thing that's kind of funny, when I was reading this last night, there's a lot of me really being a promoter of Forth, talking about almost like it was like part of my marketing hat. Because when I was a technical writer for Fourth Inc., I was thinking about promotion of Forth, because it was the company and they wanted to sell the product and they wanted everybody to think, hey, we should be programming in Forth and forget all these other languages. So I have a little bit of a waving the flag marketing hat on when I was writing, and it was still carried over when I was writing and Thinking Forth. So the answer is I was really involved in the projects and seeing how I could communicate how they were done. And I just kind of absorbed that. And I did enough Forth programming on my own, even though it wasn't professional work, it was just my own work. I could see what the problems were. And even writing the text editor, I could see when I could paint myself into a corner and I would solve the problem in the wrong order, and then I wouldn't be able to get my way out of it. So I learned those things, even though I was not getting paid to write that program. I went through all the same mistakes. And I think it's because I was new at it. It's because I had just learned all these things. It made it easier for me to explain them to people who had, you know, that was my audience. Than people who had, if you know something really well, like 30 years worth of knowledge about something, it's hard for someone to explain it to a beginner because they don't know where to start untangling it. You know, what's the first thread that you pull? Because they see it as a big, all interconnected thing. So I had the advantage of being a newcomer, and I think that helped me be able to explain these things better too.
Well, it was definitely effective. I've been a professional developer for like 35 years now, and I reread Thinking Forth every couple of years, and it's still like, oh yeah, you know, it still clicks things into my head and gets me thinking about something different, because you know, a lot of my programming is C++ and stuff, not so much Forth, but I'm really big on domain specific languages and things like that. So yeah, it really worked, and I just want to say, you know, thanks for writing that. It's absolutely timeless. It's one of the timeless computer software classic books that I keep. I still have my original copies.
That's really nice to hear. I've seen Bill had his hand up for a while.
Now, Leo, could you give us a little postscript on your personal life through puppetry into music? What's happened after Thinking Forth?
Oh, thank you for asking that. Well, okay, I'll try not to make this too long and drawn out, but after I left Forth Inc., and I was still living in Southern California, the LA area, I did some work for a company called Digilog, which was it was a really cool company. They used Forth a lot in their products, and their products were all based on the automotive industry, and they built computers to run what the industry calls test cells. These are where they're like put an automotive engine in a lab, and they'll run it for thousands and thousands of hours over, you know, different simulations. And so they needed software to control the engine and also to control the measuring tools, the dynamometers and things like that, and to record all and track all the information so that they could run scientific tests on different, sometimes people were experimenting with the engine itself or different, you know, models of engines, or they were using different lubricants or different fuels and things like that. So Digilog was doing a lot of work, and they hired me for years to write their technical manuals. And I also ended up writing some of the software to do the analysis, which was where I had a chance to use an object-oriented flavor of Forth as well as just regular Forth. And it was all based on Forth Inc.'s Polyforth. And so I got a lot of experience in programming in Forth when I was there. I left Southern California. I was a single dad, and my son was about 12, and we just decided we wanted to get out of the environment of Southern California. We moved up to Northwest Washington, a little island called Ouwerkerk Island, which is pretty close to Canada. And we lived there for several years. And while I was there, I got a call from someone at Microsoft who had read one of my books or more. I don't know. He was familiar with me from my books, and he hired me, or he tried to get me to be hired as a programmer writer, a technical writer at Microsoft. And so I ended up doing that for about 3 years, and I moved to Seattle, and that and then I moved from there into, this was like at the start of the .com era. It was like 1998, 1999, that kind of thing. And before the .com bubble burst. And so there were all these tech companies, and I got hired away from Microsoft to be a program manager. And so a lot of the things that you know, all the software design issues came up and were very important there when I was doing program management. And I did that. I also did that at Real Networks, which used, you know, the company that makes the player and those kinds of things, which are not, I don't know what they're doing now, but that was a very interesting several years. I was really working in the tech, in the software industry in Seattle. Not only at Microsoft, but at these two other more startup-y companies, smaller companies. So that was a great experience. And then in Seattle, I met my current wife, and we then had another family because we adopted two babies, and so we've raised them, and they're now just about to graduate college. In the meantime, I had taken up puppetry very early on, actually, because I got really inspired by the Muppets and I wanted to do that. So I did a little bit of that up until I moved to Orcas Island. But I've been doing music all my life. And now here I have a recording studio. This is the room I'm in, is my recording studio. And I'm working on an album. I'm recording an album for an artist. And that's just so much fun. I'm doing all the recording and mixing. And I just love doing that. So I've got this whole other world of interests. And I've also been working for my wife's company because she has a training company. So I did all the technical work for the training company, including the website design and developing software tools for learning engagement and things like that. So I've been busy.
We have two questions more for Leo, one from Aaron, and then Charles.
Hi, Leo. So I discovered your books in the local public library when I was, I guess, a teenager and trying to figure out what I wanted to do. The library was very small and had maybe one little shelf of programming related books, and I read them all. But I think there were, of those, I think there were two books that were most influential in my thinking and my decision to go into the field. And one was Thinking Forth, and the other was an interesting little book. I just had to look it up just now, by Scott Forsman, called The Viewport Technician, which was all about how to write software that could run on all the different GUI systems that existed at the time, whether an Apple IIgs or a Mac or a Windows, early Windows. And these were really foundational to my thinking and my decision to go into software later on. And interestingly, I think the most influential other book, which I must have read about 8 years later, was a collection of papers by David Parnas. And that paper you mentioned right at the beginning was was really key to the way that I think about software. So I just wanted to mention that, and your influence through your books was actually really huge. Still working software today.
You know, it's just nice to hear that, and I'm glad there are so many support groups like Figforth in the day and this now where you all can support each other and share your knowledge. And
it's fun. This Facebook group just kind of popped up on my feed like a few days ago. I haven't thought about Forth much in years, but it was really fun to come and hear you speak.
Thank you. Yeah, you mentioned David Parnas, and you know, at the time, it's interesting because just yesterday I decided to have something to show on the screen. So I looked him up, right? And he's really only I'm 70 right now, and he's like 82 or something like that. So he's not that much older than me. And my recollection, you know, as a young man, he was like an established figure, and I've never wrote to him or contacted him. And
I had the opportunity to meet him at a conference in Switzerland several years ago.
You had the opportunity to meet him?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well,
yeah,
I was surprised because he's done a lot of interesting stuff. So I don't know. I don't think he has any idea that anybody wrote a book that was, or his work was kind of foundational like that. It'd be kind of fun to let him know about that. Oh, what's next, Peter? I see people with their hands raised. Oh, you're muted, Peter.
Please, Charles. Charles.
I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
Travis, first Charles, I think.
Oh, Charles. Oh, I thought Okay, I'll,
Charles is waiting. Do you have sound, Charles? Can you unmute? Unmute.
You were unmuted in Zoom, but your audio wasn't working, so.
Talk on the microphone, please, Charles.
I think he's
Charles' mic is not working.
In the meantime, we can hear Travis, Leo, if you.
Yeah, Travis.
Okay, Travis, then.
Unmute yourself. There you go.
okay. Yeah, I heard Charles. I wasn't sure if you met Travis or not, so.
No problem. Go ahead.
Okay. Leo, I've got a question about what are your views on, you might say, more modern fourth features like object orientation and local variables and stuff like that? Because I've got a fourth I've written, Zepto fourth, and I've added such features to it. And to be honest, they are very convenient to use, particularly local variables, but they always feel so heretical when I'm using them. Like I shouldn't actually be using local variables by fourth, that it's unfourthy to have your code filled up with local variables. And even though it totally gets rid of all the stack, turn, and the constant swap, dupe, over, drop, dupe, wrote, all those kinds of things. But it's like, should I actually be doing this, or should I be doing it the traditional way?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I'm not familiar with modern fourth languages at all. I just have not. I've been busy doing other things, but it's not that I don't think it would be interesting, but it's just I haven't done it. Second thing, though, when you talk about variables, I remember just reading in this book yesterday when I was looking at it again. There's a I think a pretty good discussion about how you kind of paint yourself into a corner by having variables. Every time I would use a variable, I'm talking about when I was using PHP for the last 20 years. There we go, all the variables. Yes, that's right. He's got, Peter has the cartoon about too many variables.
Yeah.
But I would just say, if you are working on something, just use your own experience. Do you ever find that things seem less modular, like the whole idea of decoupling things from each other? You kind of lose that when you're using variables, unless you use them in some kind of way where they're local to the module. So it's just your own experience. If you find that you're painting yourself into corners and then frustrating yourself and wondering, well, why is something happening? What's happening because this variable got set by something I didn't even remember that was setting it, and now it's always looking at that variable. Those kinds of things. If you have trouble with that, then don't do that, or, find your own answers to the question. That would be my answer. Does that help?
Thing is, I find there to be a difference between global variables and local variables. That global variables I try to avoid, like the plague, because they are completely non-modular, and there's no way you can have, especially because the fourth I have is a multi-threaded, multi-core fourth. And if you have all of these threads going around doing stuff, they're going to be stepping on each other's toes without careful usage of locks and stuff like that when you've got global variables. And the local variables, they've eliminated a lot of stuff where previously, before I introduced local variables in my fourth, I would have, let's say, one privileged parameter that I would stuff onto the return stack. And then I would continuously read from the return stack as it went through my word, and then it would R-drop it at the end, which was more convenient than stack churn, but at the same time was still not ideal either. And introducing local variables, maybe just so I could assign it to a name, and then I would refer to that name as I needed to, as opposed to having to manually manage the return stack.
Yeah, again, it's just what works for you. I think it's possible sometimes to get hung up on, oh, is that not true to fourth? You know, like, is that not real fourth if I do that? Am I breaking some rule? And I don't think Chuck ever looked at things like that. He looked at what works, what's practical, what's maintainable, and that kind of thing. So you get to decide that. That's all I can say about that. Do we have Charles? Did you get your audio working? Because I don't know.
Charles is muted.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Let me get my camera on here. Leo, a little bit of nostalgia here.
Oh my, yes.
And
wow. Is it signed? Look at that.
Autographed.
Wow.
Leo and Chuck.
Wow. Collector's item.
So I was at Fourth Thinking about the same time you were. And that's why I have that. That was what I showed you guys is an internal preview copy that was handed out to Fourth Inc. employees and close associates like customers. I think there was only like 100 copies made or something. But
what's your last name, Charles?
That's
what?
Say again.
What's your last name?
Curley. C-U-R-L-E-Y.
Oh yes, Charles Curley. Okay, I'm sorry. Yeah, I remember you. That's fun to see you again.
Uh-oh. Okay, good. And you talked about the text formatting program that you wrote in Fourth. I took the basic concept and wrote my own version of that later, and turned out to do a number of articles with it. And I started on a book with it. And I actually ended up rewriting my word processor to editorial specifications, which most people don't do.
Wow.
So anyway, I wanted to thank you very much for both of your books. They've been a great help to me.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and to be clear, I want to make sure that I said this right and that what Charles just said doesn't confuse the thing. Chuck Moore created the text formatter. He wrote the original text formatter that Fourth Inc. used for all their technical documentation. And that's what I built my own version of. And I think Charles is saying he built his own version of it as well. But it was not something that I invented originally. Okay, who is
next? Cecil.
Not so much a question, but a comment. Like many here, I own the book and I've read it many, many times. And I have a lot of books on, and that's the book I keep going back to because it made you think about how you write software. And then later on, when I was commercially writing C and Pascal programming, I carried those thoughts to it to make the programs work better. The breakdown into smaller routines rather than these giant. I remember originally I used to write these C functions that were pages and pages and pages. And I learned from that book how to break things down so they're more understandable, so that they're easier to follow and easier to debug. So I was very grateful for that book because it really changed the programming style that I had at the time, and it's proved very effective over the years. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing that.
And one quickie thought on the previous person. Rule of thought is 3-4 items in the stack and no more. Otherwise, it gets totally out of hand.
True. True.
Christian.
That's actually because that would be
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
a function that's trying to do too much. It might be an indication that the word that you're writing is trying to do too much if it has to manage more than 3 things on the stack. It's just a possibility, something to think about. Yes, who's next?
I think Peter just said Christian, so I'm going to slip in a question. Leo, when I read Thinking Forth, it was the first time I was reading a book about programming that started by design. You put a lot of emphasis on designing. And this is, as a beginner, even though I've been exposed to Forth for 20 years, I consider myself as a beginner compared to all those people in the group. And the design process is very important. And what would you say is the most important part in designing? Because most of the time, if something doesn't end up being right for me, it's because it didn't start right. And that's the design.
Well, you know, I'm uncomfortable being put in the position of pontificating about something like that because it's so personal for everybody. And I can say though that in my own experience of actual programming, that it really helps me to think about what the problem really is that's being solved, and not what not necessarily the way it's stated or the way it's presented by the person that that wants it or whatever. It's hard to describe, and that's kind of why I wrote the book. One thing I noticed that I would do that would get me in trouble would be I'm kind of drawing a blank. I'm sorry.
There are so many ways to get in trouble.
Yeah, there's so many ways to get in trouble. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I've gotten in trouble so many times. But I really do like the idea that if you think about what the essence of the problem, sometimes it takes several tries actually to write code. You find out, well, what is this thing really? Like it's hard to put these into words, but sometimes you think of it one way. It's like the guy with trying to get the car door open by looking at the car on the door that's locked instead of the one that's open. You can get to it just takes a while. Chuck was just brilliant at this, at thinking of a way to think about the problem. And that was a term that I came up with, and I think I used it in the book, the conceptual model. To me, to understand what is a conceptual model, or it's kind of like a mental abstraction of the problem that you're trying to solve. Because, and I think with agile programmers, that was what I was saying in the book. They tend to just want to start writing code. They just want to jump in and start prototyping. But I think that there's a step that happens before you even think about code, where you're thinking about how do I want to perceive this thing as if it were a thing before I write it as code. So there's the real thing, and then there's your mental model of the thing, and then there's the code. I don't know if that helps at all, but that's kind of the main thing that I would suggest is a way to look at it, and the most important thing when you're thinking about design.
Okay, so I think it's a little bit like languages. It starts with a concept, and then it becomes a word in your head that you can manipulate to do something. And the whole concept of Forth seems to be very close to language, human language in general. And I think it clarifies the thing. I have to get the concept straight first. Even though I may not have the word to do it, Forth will give me the word to clarify the concept.
Yeah, you really need to start with that.
Okay, thanks, Leo.
Yeah.
Greg.
Yeah, hi, Leo. I just wanted to start by saying I have multiple copies of both Starting Forth and Thinking Forth. I guess when I like a book, for some odd reason, I have to have multiple copies of it. I did also want to say that, in the 80s and especially in the 90s, when I went back to college, I was reading a lot of books about structured programming at the time, and then that evolved into object-oriented programming. And it's always been a topic that I've been interested in. So in addition to reading scholastically, I've also read on my own. And when I look back, I think Thinking Forth was one of it may have been the very first book that exposed me to that type of thinking back in the 80s. And what resonated with me there was the thinking about how to think about a problem, get to the essence of it. And as you said, maybe the problem that you think you're trying to solve isn't really the problem that needs to be solved. So that's a very important concept, but also the aspect of language-oriented programming that somebody else mentioned earlier. I think it was Benjamin. That's a concept that has really resonated with me. The idea that the language is a set of building blocks, and you are basically creating abstractions on top of that to form a way of expressing your problem. And I think that's probably been one of my biggest takeaways. And I also wanted to mention that, and this is just my opinion, a good follow-on, I think, to that book or that kind of thinking is a book called Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programming by Sussman and Abelson. It's actually used as an introductory book at MIT. I don't know if it's still used, and it uses scheme, by the way, which, I guess if we're all comfortable with you shouldn't have any problem. It's a very easy language to learn, and they covered it in the book. And actually, there's a set of 20 lectures that are free, and I highly recommend that before even buying the book. But it very much kind of goes into or extends on the concepts that we were just, I was just referring to of thinking about a problem, thinking very generally about it, and also the whole concept of language-oriented programming. So at any rate, I just wanted to mention that I think that your book was a good foundation that's helped me throughout my career. And I love thinking about, problem solving, because to me, that's what it's all about. I'm not as interested in the nuts and bolts sometimes of the technology, but how to approach a problem. So just wanted to mention that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have questions from Cecil. Another question, or first Dimitri? Dimitri, go ahead.
Oh,
okay. Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. So I'll bring some of the conversation that we've been having in the chat out, but this does also relate to Thinking Forth, because I've only really had access to the more modern editions, and so I enjoy reading at the start, things that have changed over the years. And one is Leo, your thoughts on object-oriented programming. And I was thinking, where do you think object-oriented programming fits in relation to Forth? Like, what kind of application do you think that a programmer could see an advantage?
Yeah, again, there's so many people that have probably much more valuable information to say about this. I know that I kind of changed my mind over from one edition of the book to the other, and in the most recent book, I kind of talk about the fact that I over apologized previously or something. so I kind of changed my mind, but I guess what I can tell you that my impression is a lot of what people call object-oriented programming today, has to do with mechanics of making these, classes and things like that, which I have never, and I have used these application languages and object-oriented programming a little bit, especially when I was learning software at Microsoft. But it seems like to me, a lot of it's overhead that has to do with building classes and not with actually solving your problem. That the huge amount of your page space is just taken up on defining the class and all these other things and the constructors and everything like that. It doesn't seem like it's related to the problem. But the idea of having, the idea of using this, letting the software help you encapsulate the logical principles or logical idea of a component is really great. And I think that was, so I think like object-oriented programming as it's now understood was informed by some of these great ideas from David Parnas and other people like that. It came out of that. And I think those principles are really great, but it's kind of like my feeling is, just between you and me, my feeling is that a lot of the object-oriented programming is kind of like a codified, overly codified reduction of these really cool principles to a place where you're more constrained than you are freed. That's the best I can answer.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think even some of the originators of object-oriented paradigm have mentioned that things kind of went in a direction that wasn't really what they expected, because people were focused on some principles more than others, and actually a lot of the main principles were lost. I think there's this language called self that actually does without classes, and but still has objects, and so you can do a lot of interaction. But I find this an interesting thing, because I think Smalltalk and Forth have some very vague similarities between them in terms of how you can interact with an environment, and the way you can sort of redefine words so that they do different things.
Yeah, when I was at Digilog, I was actually given the task to write some software that would do an analysis of the data that was taken from the sensors recording the measurements from the engine and all that kind of stuff. And I don't remember the details, but I do remember we had an object-oriented version of Forth. And what worked about it really well, I apologize for not remembering the details, but we could write code that would reference, that could do analysis using words that were defined for a certain set of data or a certain way of doing things, or a certain, I don't know, maybe certain kinds of sensors or whatever. And then we could use the same code, the analysis part of the code, using those same words, where those words were then calling things that were built by objects that were of a different data type, right? So completely different data structures, but the code, the higher level code still worked, because the information about how the data was managed was encapsulated in those data objects, if you will. So that's what I remember being really good about it, really cool. We didn't have to rewrite the analysis logic for these different data object types. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I think that's really well summarized.
Leo, I want to ask a friend of us from India, Abhijit, are you in the group? Hello? Are you in the meeting? If he wants to send compliments from India. Abhijit, I see you here. Yes. I think you are muted. Or it's probably too late. And Rob in Australia. How are you, Rob? Do you want to say hello?
Nothing much to say here, Peter. I'm starting to nod off, mate. It's pretty late. But anyway, yeah. Hi, Leo.
You are not thinking forth. I think you are sleeping forth, Rob. Alexandre Dumont in Spain, another friend from us. Do you want to say hello to Leo?
Hi, Leo. Well, I don't have any question, but it's really great to have the opportunity to hear from you, from your experience, from your past in Fourth Inc. and how you got to write the books and all this. I was in the previous talk that you gave here for the Fourth 2020 group, and it was already very inspiring for me. So thank you very much, and I own a copy of your book.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And what about Francois Laguel here in the meeting? He's making me questions, but I can't answer, Francois, because I am keeping care of the group.
I have a question for Leo. What did you do, if it's not a state secret, during those years at Microsoft?
Okay, it's not a state secret. No, I was hired as what they call a programmer writer, which meant that I was writing technical documentation for developers. So I would write documentation for APIs that Microsoft was building. And one of the platforms that I worked on, it was at the time it was called, I don't know what it's called now, but it was called Site Server, and they had something called it was a commerce server, right? So it was a framework or an API that other applications could call to run commerce applications. And this was the beginning of, internet-based commerce. So I was just writing the documentation, and it was a very strict format. Here's your word, and then here's the parameters that it takes and what it does. And I really loved doing that, because I would go to talk to the programmers who were actually building the stuff. And I would, because I was putting myself in the wearing the hat of explaining this to somebody who would be using it, I was asking questions like, well, why would you use, I was asking them a lot of questions like, why would you do that? Why is it this way? And sometimes I would go, honestly, to be honest, it didn't make sense to me necessarily. I mean, most of the time it did, but sometimes I would think that's going to be a problem, or that's going to be hard, or whatever. And I would ask questions like that. And I think they generally enjoyed me being around, at least for the time that I was there.
Were you under the impression that their software was actually designed in any way?
Oh, that's a really good question. Like, how did they? I actually I don't think that there was a lot of design. I don't think it was. I definitely formed some opinions about the whole corporate structure there that probably I'm just not going to say them, but it was an interesting environment. Let's put it that way.
They seem to have a corporate culture that venerates complexity, and that's anti Fourth completely. So I didn't really expect you to work for those guys.
Well, it was fun, and I needed to live in Seattle, and it was a great job. It only lasted for 3 years though.
Well, that could be a long time.
I enjoyed working there, especially as a contractor, and the people I was working with. That's a whole other story. I don't want to get into all of that, the politics of it, but I think there was a kind of the kind of personality that was respected in that company in general, and this probably came from Bill Gates all the way down, were kind of younger males who were just real good at self-promotion, you know, and it was not so much about how
Teamwork.
yeah, it really wasn't. So it was about getting the deadline. It's about hitting a deadline, really. And it's just a completely different environment. So it wasn't, I enjoyed myself while I was there, but it's, I was happy to leave.
Thank you.
Oh, Aaron has got his hand.
Yes,
Oh,
Aaron.
I just a comment, since everybody's talking about design and things, I'm wondering if people know this book.
oh.
It's not a perfect book, but it's an interesting contribution to the discussion. I think it's totally worth reading.
Who's the author?
By John Oosterhout. I'll just write it in the chat. John Oosterhout, A Philosophy of Software Design. He starts with Parnas's paper as the inspiration and tries to come up with a, I guess, more modern approach. And I'm not convinced by everything in this book by any means, but it's thought-provoking and we're absolutely worth reading on the topic. I'll write it in the chat for everybody to see.
Yeah.
And Cecil.
One of the things that got mentioned was that there are several versions of your book. And I wonder if you could tell me what is the latest version, because the one I have is pretty old.
Which book? Thinking Forth?
Yeah, Thinking Forth. Which is the latest one that you edited and so forth? So I can try to find me a copy.
Well, this one here is the
See,
latest.
mine doesn't have it covered like that.
Right. But I don't know which version do you have? I don't know that there's really substantial differences. I never went through a process of rewriting it, you know, like Starting Forth actually went through an extension revision by me several years, like maybe 5 years after it was first published. But this book never got really a revision.
Okay. I mentioned before how I read a lot of books on computer programming, and I was really amazed when I first read your book, and I read some of Mr. Moore's literature that was available. A totally different approach how to solve a problem, starting with what is it you're trying to do. And that was a problem I had, you know, nth feature to the program that the customer didn't even ask for, and making things more and more complicated, which sometimes got you in trouble. And so your book and Chuck's literature kind of said, hey, whoa, think about the problem. What is the simplest way to solve that problem? And then break it down in little pieces so they're understandable. Go from there. And it really changed the way I think. Even in other languages, it made me a better programmer, because I was compared to all these other books, which they teach, object programming. This feature, that feature. What's the latest? I'm trying to think what the latest and greatest fad is, but they keep going from one fad to another fad because they don't have the answer, you know? It's just their personal thing. And I'm so grateful to be able to read your book and Chuck's literature. And I'm kind of concerned. Chuck is getting up in years, so one of these days he's going to be gone, and we won't have any more insights from him. And it's really what we need is more insight from him. He has an obsession, which is to simplify. And I guess people who are educated in the higher levels of language think that that's foolish. But when you observe the mess that you have out there with computer programming and how they keep coming up with new schemes to, this is the silver bullet that's going to fix everything. And then a few years later, they find out it doesn't and they go on to the next. So simplicity is a key in itself. So thank you. Thank you for all the members here too. Many of them are program force for many years, and I like to read their one of the ones I like a lot is Brad Rodriguez. He's made a lot of literature available about fourth, and so thank you to all of you for making life simpler.
You're welcome. I'd like to ask Bill Ragsdale, because I just noticed a comment that he said, and I'd like you to elaborate on that, because I just really don't know what you guys have been doing. But Bill says the user interface for Win32 fourth, the editor and IDE are in object-oriented fourth. So can you, because we've been talking, people have been asking you about object-oriented fourth. So what are you doing with that, Bill?
This is in Andrew McEwen's original work. The fourth itself is monolithic ANS fourth, but there's an integrated development environment, an editor, and some other elements, and they're all written in object-oriented fourth. So the minute you start to do anything on display other than text, it becomes object-oriented. So you draw boxes, you put things in them. There is a intimate integration with Windows. I believe there are 10,000 some Windows callback call functions hidden in the system somewhere. And so it is a cryptic segment of Win32 fourth that I look at, but I have not delved into. Andrew has about 16-page write-up on what it is and how to use it. But I've not delved into it. But the minute you want to do anything other than text on the screen, you're into object-oriented fourth. And it's included, it's all the sources there. Very well written as far as I can see. Very, very clear. No spaghetti code. I mean, it's very linear.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Peter Jakaki.
I'm just trying to think what I was going to say, but considering your unique perspective and on fourth from the beginning there, writing all this information, and then all your other experience with Microsoft and Muppets and you name it, I think that if you did starting fourth again, have to be restarting fourth. What do you think would be the big difference in that book or in fourth itself that you'd like even perhaps because before you were writing for fourth ink, etc., and about fourth, but would you see, like for instance, Bill mentioned object-oriented fourth, for instance. My question is a bit long, but basically, yes. With your unique perspective, what do you see would be something that you would introduce into a new book? Yeah. Sorry.
Before I answer your question, I just have to say, I really love the environments all you guys are in. I mean, a lot of you are in your labs, and you don't see that very often. At least, in the work that I do, we don't see people in their labs and there's these cool instruments on the desk behind them and stuff like that. I just think that's really fun. We do a lot of training, and we're on Zoom all day with companies doing corporate training and stuff like that. People aren't in labs. I love that. Anyway, to answer your question, you know what? I think at my age, I think if someone was going to do that, they'd have to be as young as I was when I wrote these books, because my mindset at that time was just like, this is amazing. People are doing all this stuff, and I'm kind of wanting to retire at this point. Not that I don't want to be busy. I just I just, I think my brain isn't as malleable as it was 40 years ago, 50 years ago. So let's let it be up to the young people who think about things differently, and they really do in great ways.
Yeah, you know, like starting fourth, I think. Sorry, Leo. I found starting fourth. I found fourth, and it was really exciting. But what made it really inspiring was your book. And you know, today you're talking to the young ones, and but they don't seem to latch onto fourth. You know, I don't know whether it's the emphasis on more on the higher levels of you know, like they get libraries and they get, you know, these boards, and we made up boards from various chips and program them up at machine code level, even assembler level. And so that's why I was just wondering about what perhaps you'd feel that, you know, not that you're going to do this, but you feel that might be something that would freshen it up, restart forth. We don't know. We discuss this all the time. Any ideas, anyone?
Not for me. Okay. Are we winding down, Peter?
Oh, Leo, I want to share one moment the screen, my screen, if you allow me.
Oh, please.
I love this one. The traditional compiler and the fourth compiler. And I want to say something to all the group. Nobody talk about, but Leo is an artist, and without his point of view of an artist creating this kind of cartoons, nobody of us would enjoy so much his books. We are in his books. We are readers of his books, not only because of the content, but of the creativity of Leo. And Fourth Inc. was very clever. The best thing they did, of course, they did a lot of good things, but one of the best things they did for the company and for the fourth community later was to hire such a creative person.
Thank you. I was reading the book last night, and if I hadn't been reading it, I wouldn't really understand what that cartoon was saying. I don't think, but I understand what it, because I read the book, I understand what that's saying. It's saying that, you know, a traditional compiler, it's all built in, and you can't get into that and add to it or modify it. You're stuck, and you can just feed it the words, the tokens, or whatever the language you're writing in. You feed it in there, and it figures out what to do with it, but you have no control over it. Whereas in fourth, the compiler words are just words, and you can add words to the compiler. And so you have, it's happening on the outside of this pre-compiled compiler. So it gives you a lot more flexibility. I think that's what the cartoon is trying to say. But thank you.
And also, I see another thing here in this picture, Leo. Nobody of us can understand what is here inside in this big mess of a traditional compiler, but we can read now how the fourth compiler is written. We can read it in a line or in 2 lines here, and this is amazing. What Leo explains in his cartoons, sometimes an image is so important as many pages of text, and he does this outstanding.
Thank you.
and we enjoy it. We enjoyed. I read and many, and do you know, Leo, probably you heard this before. Many people think this is a book for kids because they see cartoons and they think, oh, force is easy, it's very easy. And I had to read the book many times to understand what was inside. It's not, nothing is easy.
Thank you. Yeah, it's hard to put into words sometimes. So I used pictures. Well, okay, I'll just wrap up then. This is so much fun to, well, it's fun to be appreciated, isn't it? I mean, retrospectively, but it's just fun to see that this has had an impact that's helped so many people. And I can't tell you how many people have said, well, you changed my life. I mean, that's a pretty, how lucky am I to be able to hear that so often, you know, that's just so cool. I mean, I know I haven't completely changed their lives, but in some way I've maybe helped them or influenced them or inspired them to do something, or to even sometimes make it a career that they might not have done. And that's just kind of an amazing thing to me. It's great. What a wonderful thing. I appreciate all of you.
With regard to those illustrations you put in there, at the time that was kind of unique, but lately I was reading some books on Lisp, and some of the books now are following that formula of cartoons to lighten up and try to illustrate a principle. And break the book down so it's easier to read. So whether it's intentional or not, it's a compliment to the style that you use in your fourth book.
Thank you. Anything else, Peter?
We have Mark Lakers, who just arrived, and we have John.
Hi, Mark.
Hi, Leo. How's it going?
There he is.
I've been here for a while.
Okay. It's good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you as well. I'm glad you stepped up and gave the presentation today.
Yep. Yeah, well, we're good.
We have also John Helmers, who is also silent. What happens, John?
Greetings. I'm very much enjoying my birthday present, Leo. Thank you very much for that today. Really enjoyed the reminiscing, and I learned quite a bit today from you and the others. So thank you very much.
Great.
Happy birthday, John. And we have also Jan Langevat from Denmark. Hello, Jan.
Hello there. Hello, Leo.
Hi.
Yeah, you have changed my life too. I started a company using Forth for integrating to telephone switches called computer integrated telephony. And I lived on that from 25 years. I lived on that application. I have to admit, I changed it to Delphi when Windows got on. I used Delphi, but now I'm back in Forth as an amateur here, trying to make a new Forth for myself in Delphi, written in Delphi. And I'm back to your books, and Elizabeth's also very, very fine book. So first now, after 25 years, I'm starting to really understand what is going on inside, because I have to write it myself. That's a very good way of learning.
Cool. Good.
Richard, do you like to say hello to Leo?
Yes. Hello. I really enjoyed reading your book. I'm very fresh into the fourth domain, but it's I appreciate the ability to create words and extend the language. And I also kind of like the concept that you can forget a set of words and then create a new dictionary based on the, like if you had like a state machine. I kind of like to think of the fire truck example where you have a navigation, a set of words for navigation. You drive to the fire, and then you forget your navigation, and then you learn how to operate the ladder and the fire hose or something like that. So it seems like fourth is very ideal at being kind of like a polymorphic architecture, so that you could build a very, very tight physical structure to implement a solution. But I appreciate your book because I'm a bachelor in computer science engineering, and your description of programming and how to approach solving problems is very, very good. So thank you for your contribution. It's excellent.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Frederick, where are you in the world? In Sweden, Denmark? Frederick, are you? Do you like
which
to...
Frederick? Because there's two, I think, right now.
Oh, the simple is your family name?
Yes. Do you understand me? Is my mic
Perfect.
on? Okay. I'm from Belgium.
Belgium. Okay.
Most of the low-level stuff goes over my head still, but I'm working on some things, and I've read Leo's book, Starting Forth. I really enjoyed it. I'm not really a programmer. I just have some scripting experience, self-taught. But I came to Forth in two ways. I'm like involved in game design, game development, and computer-aided design, architectural design. And also I'm getting fed up with the state of software. Just getting really, really much of a problem. Like I've been following the work of a great game designer, Jonathan Blow, who made Braid and The Witness. And he's also developing his own language called Jai. So it's more a higher level language, which is targeted at game development, but could replace C++. It's procedural completely. So not object-oriented, which is pretty much a hoax, just as operating systems are, as Chuck mentioned. And Chuck also mentioned that like in a week, the whole semiconductor thing can collapse. So there's a need to be more efficient and considerate of the energy and space and time aspects of programming. So that's my main interest in it. I'm a bit of a slow learner, but I'm designing the whole the thing I'm working on in my head mostly. I haven't actually touched Forth yet. After a year, I have a strange way of learning. So I'm more, I like the DSL aspect, the domain specific language. So it's like writing the language, and then later on I'll figure out how to actually implement it before I start with that, or have people who help me with that. What else? Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
I could tell more, but maybe another time. Effort is very important. And I also have a great interest in green array chips, which are so advanced. It's amazing. Even they're 10 years old. I think people don't really realize what's it's like Forth with 30 years of refinement added on top in hardware. So that's pretty amazing. So I make furniture. I want to integrate like little controllers in my furniture, and like I have some new ideas for a new kind of computer, but I think I'm not sure because I'm really just a beginner. Well, not really, because yeah, that's another topic. So
Okay, no problem.
So I can go on and on, but I'll keep it.
Next meeting, Frederick. But we are very happy to see you here. Keep care. And then another one, Charlie Hitzelberg. Where are you, Charlie? Are you in your bus? He's traveling the world. Charlie? Oh, he pressed the wrong button, I think. Who else? Bernd. Oh,
I'm here. Oh, I'm not.
Yes, you are.
Okay. I'm in Ohio. I've got a bus, and I'm going to take it to 100 libraries in the USA in the course of a year. Thank you, Leo, for teaching me fourth. I've got your two books from back in the 80s, and R.G. Lawler's Threaded Interpretive Language, which is what I use to write my own fourth. It's a fourth 83. It uses the PET screen editor with 68 bytes more to do the full, on top of what's in the blinking cursor stuff in the ROM. So it's very efficient. The core is 5.5K. All the labels go away, and so does the code for the compiler and everything that touches labels. So you can write your application with 5.5K of core fourth. And that's what I'm up to.
Interesting.
Fascinating is what you mean, of course.
It seemed like the right thing to do after 47 jobs.
So it looks like you've had a very interesting career.
Yeah, I used fourth once professionally at Superior Pushrod in 1985 in Northern Ohio. This was a pushrod factory, and we used it for parsing spreadsheets and reports and making material reports and inventory and just general business things. MMS fourth was the on a Radio Shack Model 4, and I went to the Rochester Fourth Conference that year and met Dick and Joe Miller.
Yeah.
I wrote my first fourth on a Model 1 actually in 1984, and it's evolved, and now it runs on 6309 processor, and it's become ANS 94 compliant, and it's got all kinds of bell and whistles that he didn't have when I was 19, but that's what the beast is now these days. It doesn't control anything at this point, which would be probably easier on a microcontroller. So yeah, that's what the ESP32 fourth effort is for, I suppose. Do you use that one?
No, I didn't use that one. I used Blazing Fourth a lot on the 64 in the late 80s. And I play around with G4th on my phone a lot. So I think one of the guys who did that is here, maybe two or three of them, the G4th people.
Yeah, we have one of them on the call. It's Bernd, and there's also Anton Ertel, the good doctor from Wien, of course. Those people are legends in the field.
Well, there's a lot of legends in this group. It's amazing. This is a cool kid lunch table.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm ready to sign off, unless I mean, I don't think there's any more questions. So I really appreciate you all being here.
I propose a big applause for Leo, and thank you a lot, Leo, from my heart here from Brazil.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Make some
Thank you.
cartoons. Make some cartoons, Leo, and send to the group as you wish. You are a member, and we enjoy all your creativity.
I will do that. All right, guys. I'm gonna sign off. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leo. See you around.
Take care, Leo.
Lots of thanks.
Thank you.
Almost time for breakfast for me.
Lunch here.
Cornelius, I think we can stop the recording.
Yes, shall do. Here
And
we go.
if people like to chat, we start the fourth